Welcome back to the Right Wave Audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we're going to cover the brand new AudioControl AV processors and AV receivers, which are the first models from AudioControl that have HDMI 2.1 capability. And of course, what comes with that is 8K capability. And these are the new S models that replace the existing ones that don't have 2.1 support. So these are called the Maestro X7S and X9S processor, and the Concert XR-6S and Concert XR-8S receivers. And if you've been following the audio market, you know there's a connection between AudioControl and the Harmon brands. Harmon produces technology for audio controls, which forms the basis for these processors. And these are namely the equivalent models from JBL, the SDP-58 and the ARCAM AV41 processors, as well as the JBL Synthesis SDR38 and ARCAM AVR31. Now, Harmon also has their Lexicon brand, but they have not introduced the HDMI 2.1 capabilities for Lexicon, and we're kind of wondering if Harmon is going to, keep going with processors and receivers with the Lexicon brand. But ARCAM was really first with the 2.1 capability. They came out in February of 2022, and we followed up with our own video, Right Wave Audio, in March, just a month after release. And similarly, when JBL Synthesis released their 2.1 processors and receivers in March of 22, we came out with a video in April. So here we are. We learned about the AudioControl HDMI 2.1 capable receivers and processors in October when they first started hitting in the market. And here we are in January of 23. We're doing our first report on these models. So let's go into this, and we're going to start with the Concert XR-6S. So this takes the place of the Concert XR-6. We do see that the prices are increasing with these new models. Now, some of it's justified with the HDMI technology going into it. Others are just price increases that we're seeing in the world, and we see a lot of audio brands raising prices. Now, all these models are 16-channel capable, and the Concert XR6 and 6S are no different. The original Concert XR6 came out in 2020. That had a price in US dollars of roughly $5,500. And the new Concert XR6S is just short of $6,000. So it's gone up roughly $500 in 2 years later, when it was with this new model coming out 2 years later. These all have 7 channels of amplification. Those that are receivers in the Concert range have 7 channels of class AB, in this particular case, 100 watts per channel. Now, when we look at the front and back of these units, we see no difference in the cosmetics and layout of these receivers. In fact, I didn't bother showing a side-by-side with the old XR6 because the only thing that's different is the model number with just that extra S on it. Otherwise, this is exactly identical right down to the remote control, so no changes there. When we look at the next model up, the Concert XR8 and XR8S, which is the new model, these start at $7,500 for the old one. The new one is just under $7,800. So this is going up $400. Again, it's a 16-channel receiver, but instead of being 100 watts per channel, this is 120 watts per channel. And AudioControl does this as a Class H amplification versus Class AB. And this is one of the main differences between these two models, the 6S and the 8S, is the amplification of being 20 watts more at 120 watts per channel and being class H. So this is the same difference as we always had prior to the 2.1 support. And that's roughly it. Again, it's the exact same cosmetics layout. No new ports on the back of this. So if you're familiar with audio control, the physical characteristics are exactly the same with this new model. Now, moving on to the processor models, this is their Maestro line. And the Maestro line starts at $7,500. So it's the same price as the receiver. The XR8 receiver is the same price as the Maestro X7 processor, the entry-level processor. And again, that original X7 was introduced in 2020. Here, 2 years later, we're coming out with the S model, mainly for the 2.1 support. And now you're going to be paying another $300 for this new model at a roughly $7,800. But you get the 8K capabilities. In fact, I don't think they even put on the silk screen on any of these models the addition of 8K or HDMI 2.1. They're supporting 2.1 across all the ports, so I guess that wasn't necessary. So this is the entry-level processor, the X7 16-channel unit. Now, when we look at the flagship processor, the Maestro X9, and now the new X9S, and again, coming in 2 years later, we again don't see any changes beyond the HDMI, an increase here. So we're going from $9,600 in the past to just under $11,000. So this is the biggest jump is in this flagship that's going up here with the new models. And we'll look into the DACS and maybe some reasoning that they can justify some of this, but we think there is some profit taking or what have you. But it does seem like a high amount to jump up here. So over $1,000, you're looking at a $1,300 increase to go to the new Maestro X9S. So current users of the Maestro X9, if you don't have an immediate need for HDMI 2.1, you just may want to sit tight. As we alluded to before, Harmon provides technology to AudioControl. AudioControl is a separate company from Harmon. It's not one of the Harmon brands, but they're the OEM supplier to AudioControl. So you see a lot of similarities. So the Harmon brands are JBL Synthesis, ARCAM, and Lexicon. Now, if you look just the front of these, they look kind of different. Although I did notice that the JBL Synthesis, the Lexicon, and the AudioControl all have, I would even say for the ARCAM, I figured it out, there are 10 buttons that are present on the JBL, the Lexicon, and the ARCAM, and the AudioControl that all have the same function. They all have a volume wheel or maybe multifunction, and they all have a power button. So even right down to the functions on the front panel. Now the layout's different, the cosmetics different between these, but it is very similar in its function on the front panel. Now the prices on these, and I should have started by saying this, the ones I'm quoting is, they don't post this on their website, these prices on AudioControl. They're usually sold through an integrator channel. I think oftentimes they're inflated and then they tell the customer they're getting a certain discount or whatever. So what you might pay could be considerably lower than this. In fact, I found online prices that ranged wildly, like $1,000 or $2,000 even less than what I have here. So don't necessarily beat me up on the prices, but these are close to retail list prices that I'm showing here, the best that we can from the knowledge we can gather. But you can see the relative differences here. And then we flip it around the back, and you can see how similar here that the processors all have the same type of layout and the receivers all have the same type of layout. And of course, I go through this again a little more, lining this up model for model here. And I'm dropping off the Lexicon models on here on forward just because they haven't upgraded to 8K yet on those, and I'm just not sure about their future. On this slide, I like the layout a little bit better. We got all the audio control stuff across the top. We have the two receivers on the upper left and the two processors on upper right. And then just below it, we have the ARCAM and JBL Synthesis receivers just below the audio control receivers. Maybe an XR-6S is closer to an ARCAM AVR31, and a Concert XR-8S is closer to a Synthesis SDP-58. And then likewise, when we look on the right-hand side, we have the Maestro X7S. Maybe that's like the ARCAM AV41. And the audio control Maestro X9S flagship is like the JBL Synthesis SDP-58, which is not the flagship of JBL. They have another flagship in the model above this, which is sourced from Trinoff. So that's a different animal in itself. So we just keep that one separate. So looking at the inside, well, I don't have an inside picture of audio control, but I believe it's like the ARCAM and Lexicon of the past. And it's hard to find inside shots of these products. So we had to go back to the prior generation on these like branded products. But you can see the layout is very consistent, using a toroidal power supply, and the boards are quite small. I mean, the chassis is bigger than it probably needs to be, but no harm there. Let's take a look now at the speaker layouts. Now, I said these are all 16-channel processors or receivers. The receivers differ from the fact that they all have 7 channels of amplification. You're not going to find a receiver from JBL Synthesis, AudioControl, or ARCAM that has more than 7 channels, at least today. But they do insist on putting high-quality amplifiers in there. We get a lot of reports back from those who own those products that says these can actually sound better than amplifier separates. So they've been very pleased with the amplification that's built into these, and they say they outperform those from similar brands or lower brands. The speaker layouts on this, now they can support like a 7.4.4 or a 9.1.6 as long as the channel count doesn't go above 16 channels. When you look at the processors, and these are all handled the same, whether we're talking AudioControl, JBL Synthesis, or ARCAM, we get a fixed set of outputs for your front, left, and right, center, side surrounds, and rear surrounds. And they're always available, plus 2 rows of heights. So those are always available as pre-outputs for AudioControl and the other brands of processors here. Then you have a choice. So you have these outputs 13, 14, 15, and 16. And you have a choice on 13 and 14 between 2 options, and 15 and 16 and 3 options. So you can choose, for example, whether you're going to do front wides or another row of height channels. And those are what we colored in yellow. So that's a choice between those 2. You also have a choice on whether you're going to use that for a subwoofer. And this is why it's between 2 and 4 channels for the subwoofer count. So you have 2 fixed subwoofer pre-outs, and the other 2 are options. So if you are taking up and assigning your 13, 14 to front wides, for let's say, you can't use that then for a subwoofer. Then maybe if you wanted a third subwoofer, then it's on 15 and 16. So you have to make these choices, so there's trade-off, because you're limited to a total of 16 channels, whether that's a subwoofer or a bass level or a height level. They all just have to add up to 16 or less channels. So keep that in mind there. So that's the same regardless of those brands. Now, when you move over to the concert series and the receivers, you have built in those 7 channels of built-in amplification. So the 8S has 120 watts per channel, and all the other ones are 100 watts per channel. And that's going to be delivering it to the front, left, right, and center, and the side surrounds. And you don't have a choice. Those will always be assigned to front, left, right, center, and side surrounds. Now, you can choose not to use them and have another external amplifier, but you can't reassign them. You can reassign, you do have a little flexibility on that last 2 channels of amplification, whether that's the rear surrounds or the front row of height channels. And this is, again, across the board, regardless of the brand or model that's shown on the slide here. I will also point out, and I forgot to mention this earlier, when it comes to height, you can actually configure a center height channel, and this is also probably known as the voice of God, and these do support Aural 3D. So let's talk about the formats. We have Dolby Atmos and DTS:X, which seem to be the de facto standard. Every processor receiver coming out nowadays has both of those. So then it comes down to whether you have Aural 3D and DTS:X Pro. Not many have DTS:X Pro, and this is no exception. There's no DTS:X Pro at the moment for these products, any of them. But they all support Aural 3D, and hence why you would have that center height channel as a potential configuration. So that is those formats. Now, they all have a headphone jack on the front. The AudioControl brands have a 1/4-inch headphone jack, which we prefer. The others from Harmon are all 1/8-inch phono jacks. They all have a built-in AM/FM tuner. They removable IEC power cord. None of them have a power outlet on the back. We don't really see that anymore, but they all have selectable input power, whether that's going to be 110 or 220, and that's selectable at your house. You just slide the switch. So that's really nice to see. Now, I do want to talk a little bit more about these channels 13 through 16s as being configurable. I've shown this slide before, whether we were talking about ARCAM or JBL Synthesis, but here's the same thing done with AudioControl. And as you can see here, the pre-outs, they can be on the AudioControl processors, can either be done as RCA unbalanced or XLR balanced, and they're available. I do want to point out one limitation, because it only gives you one subwoofer pre-out that's balanced XLR. I will point out that these processors have one fixed subwoofer balanced output, whereas it has 2 fixed subwoofer outputs that are unbalanced. Now, you do have the options of channels 13 through 16 that are balanced and available for use for subwoofers, but if you use those, you're now limiting your ability to use front wides or a third channel on the ceiling. So keep that in mind. You have some of these trade-offs here. On the receiver models, and you can see here, it has its core 5 channels that are fixed for the amplifiers. Those are the ones outlined in orange here. And then the 2 that are flanking those are outlined in red here, which you have a choice for zone 2, which I don't really talk much about, or whether it's the rear surround or the first row of heights that could be used. Very similar there, but you don't have any of the balanced outputs that you do on the processor manual. I do want to say something more about the subwoofers, and each of the manuals for these talk about it differently, although I'm not sure they're really different because, again, they're using the same code base here. So AudioControl says, yeah, you got subs 1 and 2 that can connect for line levels. And that 13, 14, 15, 16 can be configured to drive front and rear subs discretely. What I pick up on here, though, it says front and rear subs discretely. So they saying that if you have 2 front subs, they're going to be handled the same, and you have 2 rear subs and they're going to be handled the same. Do you have 4 independent, or you just have independent front and independent rear? That's a question I have. That wording is and they're very nebulous. The one thing I can't stand about Harmon is their documentation, and it kind of ripples through to AudioControl. Although it's rewritten a little bit, it's all in the same structure and everything. It's just a lot of details aren't clear, and I've read this over and over. This video has taken a long time to produce just because the clarity on some of this information is very poor on their website and on their documentation, and even some of their capabilities aren't really even advertised. So that's a shame. When I look at JBL Synthesis, it talks about subs 1 and 2 are used for a single subwoofer channel. Single subwoofer channel. That probably means that they're wired in parallel. Then they're saying 13 through 16 are for 4 independent subs. Now that's a little different than the AudioControl wording there, which can fully utilize direct live bass management. My understanding is you don't really get the independent control unless you're using the direct live bass management. And ARCAM's manual, they talk about the single channel using 2 parallel outputs. So it's a little worded a little funny on the ARCAM. It says, a dedicated sub out terminals are used for a single subwoofer channel using 2 parallel outputs. I guess that's clear, is that they're using parallel outputs. They talk about channels 13 through 16, but they don't talk about it being independent. Now, feedback I've got through this channel is they can be independent if you do the direct live bass management. We'll talk about that more in a bit. But I just wanted these subtle differences in the confusion around the support for independent subs on these models. And I'll show you one more thing. There's a configuration screen, one of the few in the AudioControl manual, an actual screenshot. And they talk about, here they show channels 13 and 14, and it's kind of grouping it. Okay, we're going to use that for the front subs, and we're going to use 15, 16 for the middle heights. It kind of alludes that the front subs are going to be treated the same. I'd like some clarity. If anybody has knowledge on that, that would be helpful. So let's move ahead. So let's go back to our comparison here on the speaker layouts, but now talk about, IMAX Enhanced, Dolby Vision, calibration, etc. So IMAX Enhanced is supported on all of these, as well as Dolby Vision, which is great. They all support direct live. Most of them include bass management on this, but the ARCAM doesn't. Bass management control for direct with ARCAM is always a paid upgrade, and you have a choice. And you can see this on the direct website. You go to the store, you select ARCAM, and it gives you a choice. Do you want single sub control, which is $349, or do you want multi-bass control, which is $100, $150 more at just under $500? What isn't clear to me, although I think it's included, is whether the AudioControl JBL Synthesis, when they say that bass control is included, does that include multi-sub bass? I believe it does. I've got a question mark. Again, if you guys can help me clarify that, that would be wonderful. Let's talk about the DACS now. These are all ESS Sabre DACs, and a lot of people like those. And they're the Pro DACs. The Maestro X9S stands apart. This is using the flagship DAC from ESS, the ES9038 Pro. It's the only one that's using this one. In mono, this chip is capable of 140 dB signal to noise. Now, with the 8 channels that are all being used, it's 132, which is still not shabby. It has a THD of negative 122 dBs. It can do 24-bit 768 kilohertz PCM files, or 256 DSD, which is 11.2 megahertz. And the PCM and DSD across the board, all these chips support that. The only thing that's really varying is the signal to noise. So when you go to the Maestro 7X, it goes from the 9038 to the 9026 Pro, and you jump down to 129 dB. It's still not shabby. THD is a negative 110. The JBL Synthesis SDP-58 is kind of in between. It uses a 9028 Pro. That's 129 decibels, or negative 120 THD. Now, when you look at the other models from ARCAM and all the receivers, except for the JBL Synthesis, but the AudioControl and the ARCAM receivers, all using an ES9026 Pro chip. And the only receiver that has something better is the JBL Synthesis which has an ES9028 Pro. So yeah, keep that in mind. Now, what does this all boil down to? The other thing that disappoints me with Harmon branded processors and receivers and the AudioControl derivative is they don't give a lot of specifications. In fact, the signal to noise ratio, they only quote for the inputs. They don't give it on the output side. So these ratings are just for the input, whether it's 93 dB or 100 dB, it's just for the input. But they do give a total harmonic distortion, and these all come in at a negative 100 dB. The PCM is 24192, so it's not leveraging the full capabilities of what the chip is. We see this occasionally with products. They do not mention DSD support on their website, in their manuals, although I do hear conflicting information. If you go look at the various forums out there, I hear some cases where they say, no, they don't have the support, and some cases they say they do. What's the truth there? Do they really support DSD? The chips are capable of it, but we've seen this in the past where manufacturers don't fully leverage the DAC chip's capabilities. It's a little extra stage they have to put in there. So we have to leave that as a question mark. Now let's take a look at the I/O. These all have 7 HDMI in and 3 out, and they're all, from what we gather from their material, again, it's a little vague, is it supported HDMI 2.1 on all of these. And it has, these all have very similar inputs and outputs. They all have 4 coax in, 2 optical in, and 1 optical out. I wish they'd give coax out instead of optical. Coax is my preference there. So those are all the same. There is no AES EBU support or other high-end features like AOIP. We do have multi-channel outputs, of course, for XLR with the processors. And this ranges between 14.1 and 12.3, depending on how you configure your 4 remaining last 4 outputs. You have multi-channel outputs on unbalance, which is the full 14.2 to or 12.4, depending on how you have it configured. You get that extra channel of subwoofer on the unbalanced side. None of these models have a multi-channel input, so no 5.1 or 7.1 input on any of these models. That's getting to be becoming rare today. And frankly, that a lot of that's handled now through HDMI. And if this thing has really good DACS, why would I be running it in my Blu-ray player if the DACS in this are really that good and we got multi-channels? So I'm okay with it, but I think some of you still would rather use your DACS in your Blu-ray player. Where AudioControl stands apart on its I/O is it's the only product with 2 XLR balanced stereo inputs. So if you have a stereo, if you have a phono preamp, an external phono preamp, and there's none built into this with balanced XLRs, you'd want this. If you have a good CD transport with balanced outputs, you'd want this. So, or a Blu-ray player for that matter. And it's likely for you to have 2 if you have some high-end gear. So, or a nice DAC, right? External DAC, but of course this has a nice internal DAC. So yeah, we missed that on the other products. Why is Harmon not putting any balanced inputs on their products? They all have 6 inputs and 1 2-channel output. There's no down mixing port, although I think it probably does that. They all have 1 zone output. There are no composite or component inputs or outputs, and there's no phono stage in any of these. A little deeper dive into the video. I don't have much more to add over the last slide because Harmon and AudioControl aren't listing the 2.1 features they support. Do they support variable refresh rate, quick media switching, QFT, ALLM? What are they supporting here? They're not telling us. That's disappointing. They are telling us that on 4K, they give us 120 frames per second. On 8K, they're giving us 60 frames per second. So that's par for the course. HDR formats, they have HDR, HDR10+, hybrid log gamma, Dolby Vision, IMAX, as we said before. They're all giving you the HDCP copy protection of 2.3, which is the latest. So that's all good, but give us the 2.1 specs. They all have Ethernet. They all have Wi-Fi. They all have Bluetooth in, but from what I can gather, no Bluetooth out. The manual doesn't talk about that, at least. So if you know otherwise, let me know. The only products that support Dante in this list are from JBL Synthesis. They have a primary and secondary Dante port on the SDP-58 and 38. You're not going to see that on any of these models. I'm not going to spend any time on Dante. You see this on some of the higher end products like Trinoff. AudioControl has some amplifiers that support that, about they're not putting it in these processors and receivers. Those that are in the pro audio world are more likely to look for this. I've had people write in to this channel wishing more products did support Dante. Unfortunately, AudioControl on its processors and receivers are not one of them. For control, it doesn't seem like there's any support for voice commands, Alexa, Google HomePod, Josh I/O, or any of that in these products. We do get Ethernet protocol control, infrared, and RS-232 connections. We do have 2 trigger outs. I like to see 4 if they can. A lot of integration support. Control 4, Savant, RTI, Creston, Elan, URC, and Harmon's own AMX. Although ARCAM doesn't support Elan or URC, at least they don't list that in their literature like the others do. It may just be a publishing problem. Streaming ecosystems, they all support AirPlay. They all support Chromecast, Roon, it's Roon tested, Spotify Connect, but it's not supporting Sonos, DTS Play-Fi, or others. That's across the board. This I'm not sure is a documentation problem or what have you. A lot of these internet streaming items are supported by the Harmon brands, the Amazon Prime, the Deezers, Napster, Spotify, Tidal, with MQA. It's one of the few that supports MQA. And VTuner, a lot of, I think, is coming through the AudioControl app called Music Life. It's sort of their version, I think, of HEOS that you see in Denon Marantz. I don't see any mention of Music Life in AudioControl literature, nor do I see anything beyond Spotify, Tidal, MQA, and VTuner specified in AudioControl literature. So whether the other streaming services are supported and whether you get the Music Life app will work with the AudioControl, that is if it is, it's an undocumented feature. Again, another thing that you can give me feedback on if they do have that. Finally, we've got the remotes. No changes here over prior models. They all share the same remotes except for a silkscreen with the brand. Now, the other Harmon ones show black and white just because the photo was black and white. But I imagine they have colorful buttons as well, and they're all backlit capable from what I understand. So no surprises on the remote. On the physical dimensions, all the Harmon ones are the same size. They're about 7 inches by 17 wide and 17 deep. I'm just kind of roughing it here, which is 170 millimeters, 130 millimeters by 430 millimeters. The AudioControl models are a little taller by about a half an inch or what have you, about 12 millimeters, something like that. The weights on these, the processors range between 27 pounds, which is the AudioControl models, and which are 12.3 kilograms. And the Harmon ones are 23.4 pounds, 10.6 kilograms. So they're a little lighter, but not by much. On the receivers with the amplifiers are naturally heavier. So we have the AudioControl ones at 40.3 pounds. The Harmon one's just a little bit less. So that comes out to be about 18.1, 18.3 kilograms. So all about the same there. The processors, when running, consume 50 watts versus the receivers consume 1.5 kilowatts, regardless of the model. On standby, they're all consuming 0.5 watts. Now, one difference between brands is where they're made. My understanding, again, something not clear to confirm, and I don't know why, my understanding is AudioControl makes everything in the United States. Now, whether that's just assembly or actually full production, again, another detail I want to know. But there's no markings on the product that shows where it's made, at least not from what I can find on the internet. On the JBL Synthesis and ARCAM products, we can see on the back of the product in small letters, made in Vietnam. Regardless of the brand, these all give you a 5-year warranty, which is great to see. That's a good, healthy warranty. Just while pointing out that the configuration screens, again, the shared technology, we're seeing from AudioControl the same menus as we would on a JBL or an ARCAM. So it's definitely sharing the software as well as the hardware here with those all together. And of course, here's a screenshot of the Music Life app. I could just check, you can still download this today. So it seems like a platform that's still alive and kicking. And I don't have a lot of feedback on how good this is. We hear more about HEOS than Music Life. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the new AudioControl models? They tend to be a little more pricey than the Harmon equivalents, but if you go like for the flagship model, the DACS do promise to have a little more performance, and you got those balanced inputs. Do you think it's worth, for those couple of enhancements that AudioControl clearly specifies in their literature? Maybe there's other items, but clearly they specified the balanced inputs and the better DAC in the X9S Maestro. Is it worth a little bit more for that product over, and being made in the United States, over Harmon's ARCAM and JBL Synthesis brands there? That feedback would be really important. The other part I will mention is ARCAM not giving you multi-bass or even single bass by default. You've got to pay several $100s to get the bass control from Dirac for the ARCAM models. Is that a problem? Give us that feedback. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this RipeWave audio community. Consider being one of our Patreons at www.patreon.com/RipeWave. That would be really appreciated. You can also do a one-time donation. Just hit that thanks button. That would mean a lot and help us channel move forward. We're really getting some momentum in the last few months, and I'm really excited about the engagement this community is having with myself and others on the channel. And hit that bell notification so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until next time, keep evolving your audio experience.